This is FreshEd, a weekly podcast that makes complex ideas in educational research easily understood. I'm your host, Will Brehm. Today marks the 400th episode of FreshEd. That's almost 10 years of work. It's been an absolute privilege to make each of these episodes. Sometimes I think I'm the luckiest person in academia because I get to talk about new ideas in education every week. Of course, none of this would be possible without you, our listeners, so thanks for tuning in each week. To mark this special occasion, I wanted to spend time with another podcaster to talk about why we love podcasting so much. My guest is Sadie Ryan. Her podcast, Accentricity, was shortlisted for Best New Podcast at the British Podcast Awards and won the Steady International Media Award in 2019.
When you're writing, you can almost hide behind like a mask of academic language, whereas when you're speaking, your voice gives so much information, so many clues about who you are as a person. You can't be this kind of disembodied expert standing up in your ivory tower because people listen to your voice and they're going to hear something about where you're from in the world, your emotion, how you're feeling, your personality, even, like your gender, your sexuality, like all kinds of parts of your identity are kind of clued up through your voice. And I think that's really powerful in itself because you could be speaking about anything, but you're not speaking from nowhere. You're not speaking as no one.
Sadie Ryan is a lecturer in languages and intercultural studies in the School of Education at the University of Glasgow. She is founder and coordinator of the University of Glasgow Podcasting Collective. Sadie Ryan, welcome to FreshEd.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so I'm really excited to be joining you today.
Thank you so much for coming today to help us celebrate 400 episodes. And I honestly couldn't think of a better person to bring on to do that than you, because you have been sort of living the world of podcasts for a long time now and sort of embody everything I think, let's say, like the future of academia needs. So I guess, how did you get into podcasting?
I started podcasting as a PhD student. So as you'll know yourself, doing a PhD, I really enjoyed it. It was a really exciting time, but it can be quite an isolating time in some ways. And I was quite nerdy about what I was doing. I was really, really enjoying myself. And I just really wanted to share it with people. So I was having all these conversations with friends and family about what I was finding. And I had this idea that maybe it would be fun to start making a podcast about my subject, which is sociolinguistics. Kind of embarrassingly, I actually had the name of my podcast before I started making it. So Accentricity. So it's about the eccentricity of accent. I was a big podcast listener and I was listening to an episode of, The Illusionist podcast with Helen Zaltzman? Oh, it's a great podcast. So it's all about words and language. And she had an episode about names of things and how kind of companies and things get named. And I was listening to it with my partner and I was like, do you know what would be a great name for a language podcast would be Accentricity. And then, just decided to start making it. Yeah. So that's kind of embarrassing. But I think quite quickly, I started making it and quite quickly it became, I think I had this idea that I wanted to share what I was finding with people, but I didn't want to just be talking to other academics. So I started interviewing friends, family, people who weren't academics but had kind of experience of the subjects I was talking about, like teachers in schools, poets. And then I started going out and about in Glasgow and just interviewing people in the streets. So I'd go to kind of a busy market and just do kind of little mini interviews with people there.
Like Vox Pop, right?
Vox Pops, yes. So I should say this is really not in my nature generally. It's quite a difficult thing to do, just going up to strangers and talking to them. But it helps when you've got a big microphone and big headphones. And I also realised quite quickly, I think, that it wasn't just a way of me talking to the world about my research. I was learning stuff through doing it and through having conversations with people outside of my discipline. It was improving me as a researcher, if that makes sense.
I think it does. It's like this idea that podcasting is just a form of knowledge dissemination. And I think it often gets reduced to that. Because it's it's Will speaking to an interviewer and that interviewer is sort of disseminating their research broadly. And to some extent, yes, that's true. But I think you're right. There's this sort of element of through an interview, you sort of something emerges that is different than just sort of disseminating the knowledge that was written in a paper. And it also, I learned a lot in the journey as well. Like on every interview, there's something quite beautiful that comes out of it, and where I am learning about this new subject, and I'm hoping that the listeners are equally sort of learning about a new subject in a way that's fundamentally different than just picking up someone's paper and reading it.
Absolutely, I really agree. And yeah, it's this idea for me that like engagement has to be a two-way process. So like sometimes within academia, the way people will talk about podcasting and other forms of kind of knowledge exchange, public engagement, whatever you want to call it, people will talk about it as if it's this kind of like, people use the word outreach, right? So it's like you're passing something out into the world, you're like standing in your ivory tower and like sharing something. But I think like it has to be a two-way process, and I think it lets a lot of stuff into the ivory tower as well, right? In really important ways.
Exactly. And the story that you said about, walking in the markets in Glasgow and sort of interviewing people, like you all of a sudden see these barriers being broken down, basically. The people who were maybe excluded or not involved in academic conversations are all of a sudden being included in some of those spaces. I find that hugely sort of exciting.
And it challenges you, like, even from the very beginning, I was learning stuff as part of my PhD. I was, learning the kind of, what would you call it, like the kind of dogma of the kind of stuff that's taken for granted within the field as being kind of like, this is our canon. And then I was going out and speaking to people and finding that sometimes people were saying things that were kind of challenging that accepted wisdom and making me think in different ways. And it was kind of really pushing me as an academic. And yeah, I think it's as important to listen to people outside your discipline as it is to talk to them, really.
Totally. And yeah, podcasting is absolutely as much about talking as it is about listening and trying to understand what the person's saying. And I always find it exciting to sort of speak to someone who's written something rather complex or difficult that might be a little bit esoteric to get into. And then when you like talk to them, you can sort of see where they're coming from in a much more sort of simplistic, or maybe not simplistic, that sounds negative, more like simple, sort of grounded, everyday, like how they came to some of these bigger ideas. And to me, that's quite rewarding and insightful to help me then understand some of their ideas that they might be writing about.
It's that humanizing thing in a lot of ways, isn't it? Like, I think that's important. And so it's that feeling, I guess, of when you go to a conference as well and you meet a person and talk to them about their work and ask them questions. And it becomes something different in a really good way.
That's right. And it sort of demystifies some of these names of, these academics that you only know by their article, who it's like, oh my gosh, there's Stephen Ball. One of the things that I've learned in my journey is that, although I mostly do interviews, podcasting is the medium, is audio, is sound. And what you can do with sound is quite powerful. And I might not be utilizing it in every interview I do, but there's other ways that podcasting has sort of used sound to help express ideas and emotions and affect and narrative in ways that are fundamentally different than what, say, the written word can do. Have you found something similar?
Yeah, well, I guess for me, like, as I mentioned, my kind of discipline that I've come into podcasting from is sociolinguistics. So I'm obsessed with like spoken voices. So there's obviously all kinds of things you can do with audio in kind of creative, artistic ways. But even if you were to take the podcast, which is the type of podcast which is most similar to a journal article. So I guess that would be an academic delivering a solo kind of monologue podcast in quite a formal tone about a piece of work they've done, but in audio rather than text. It's still not going to be the same as text because apart from anything, I think when you're writing, you can almost hide behind like a mask of academic language. Whereas when you're speaking, your voice gives so much information, so many clues about who you are as a person. You can't be this kind of disembodied expert standing up in your ivory tower because people listen to your voice and they're going to hear something about where you're from in the world, your emotion, how you're feeling, your personality, even, like your gender, your sexuality, like all kinds of like parts of your identity are kind of clued up through your voice. And I think that's really powerful in itself because you could be speaking about anything, but you're not speaking from nowhere. You're not speaking as no one. You have to kind of bring your body and your identity and yourself into your work. So I think that in itself is kind of a big difference between audio and writing. And then the listening experience as well. I think that when you're listening to audio, you're listening to a person, you're listening to another human being, and there's that kind of feeling of, they call it like this idea of oral intimacy, right? There's this feeling that you could be sitting next to this person and they're talking to you. And I think that is something that's quite different from engaging with the written word. And then, as you mentioned there, the possibilities of what you can do with audio can extend way beyond that. So you can bring in, like in my own podcast, I've done a little bit of kind of soundscaping. Sounds a little bit grand maybe for what I've done. I've definitely recorded audio out and about to give a sense of place. And kind of tried to create scenes where you can sort of hear, like when I went and recorded people in the markets in Glasgow, I went to the Barras, which is kind of quite a famous, quite noisy, chaotic market in Glasgow. So as well as speaking to people, I went and round and recorded kind of quite a lot of the sounds of the place and then brought them into the episode. I mean, I had to because there was loads of background noise, but I tried to do it in a way to give a sense of where we were in the world because I felt like that was quite important to the episode.
So what would it be like to do some of that editing of the audio? So when you're doing all this recording in the Glasgow market, are you just then playing what you recorded from beginning to end, or are you doing some editing along the way, like in post-production? I
do quite a lot of editing, yes. So as my kind of podcasting practice is in many ways very silly for a busy academic, because I really like to spend a really long time kind of editing and crafting. I've never kind of made an episode quickly, which means that I actually haven't put that many podcast episodes out into the world because I'm always spending months messing with them before I do. But then, you know, it's something that I'm doing mostly for me, really. So I can, you know, it's not, as an academic, there's quite a lot of pressure on you to deliver journal article, to, you know, to do things really fast. But because podcasting is sort of a little bit outside of that scope at the moment, I kind of don't feel that pressure. So I get to do it the way that I want to do it, which for me means, slowness.
Yeah, slow academia, slow academics, sort of bit of a, resistance against the sort of neoliberal university where the time pressures are just, everyone feels time poor because they're writing and they're teaching so much and they're traveling to this conference and doing that, and podcasting. And particularly, I love that idea of the editing. I don't think most of the listeners probably really understand what it's like to do the editing, and you can get lost and go down rabbit holes, just trying to get the one cut and the fade and all of that right can just take hours of work and going through it. On FreshEd, our most sort of what I call highly produced, because I don't know is it a soundscape, is it art? So I just say highly produced. The most highly produced shows we make are called FreshEd Flux, where we actually work with a student to sort of make a 30-minute narrative-based podcast, whatever that ends up being. But it takes like a year, like 1 year of work to make 30 minutes. And I don't think people truly understand the amount of time and resources and energy it takes to sort of do that slow academic work that is really, in a sense, pushing some boundaries in how we think about what it means to be an academic today, or what it means to create knowledge and disseminate knowledge. And so I think it's so valuable to hear you talking about going down that rabbit hole and just doing it for yourself and editing away sort of in the middle of the night. I love it. I think it's such a great thing to imagine.
Yeah, it does really feel like a labor of love sometimes, and like it really feels like kind of weaving or like making a fabric when it's really working. Sometimes it just feels frustrating. But when you kind of get into the flow of it, it really feels like you're taking different types of fabric and kind of stitching them together to make some kind of I was going to say tapestry. That again sounds really grand.
And the whole ends up being greater than the parts in many ways, right? Like that's what ends up happening. All these little strands that you're bringing together. And for those who don't know how audio editing works, but you have these like layers of audio files that you're sort of layering together or weaving together. And the what you end up hearing when you press play is very different than what any one individual audio track sounds like.
And I think for me, because, the kind of all of the work I've done actually has been very kind of, narrative, documentary style, bringing together clips. And I think especially when I first started and I was wanting to make something about language and identity in people's lives, it became a really valuable way. So I would kind of have themed episodes. And for one episode, I might speak to like an academic to give some kind of academic context on the sociolinguistic theory behind something. I would maybe speak to like 3 or 4 people who weren't academics who had kind of lived experience of this particular thing. And then I would maybe have like a poet or someone, and bringing together these different voices, I could kind of put clips of them side by side in order to kind of make things visible through those parallels, if that makes sense. So maybe I would have somebody talking about their experience and then an academic giving some sociolinguistic theory and then back to someone else talking about it. And then my kind of narrative, like a voiceover kind of weaving through. And I felt like that became a really important way to, like kind of placing these different opinions and lives and experiences side by side. It was almost like you were constructing a conversation between the different people. And that, again, became a really important way of, I suppose it's just so different from if it was just my voice, like it would be in a journal article, just talking about people, interviews I'd done or data I'd collected, having these different voices kind of almost speaking to each other. Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of disrupt the traditional academic style of having just this one authoritative voice knowing stuff. Like, that's not how knowledge is made, right? Knowledge is made through interaction and conversation.
So tell me about your process then for like that piece. Did you sort of have the idea that that's what you wanted to create in the beginning and then you went out and did these interviews, or did you sort of do some interviews and then along the way you started saying, oh, this is how I can sort of present them in audio?
That's a good question, actually, because now that it's in the past, it feels like it was always the way it ended up being, but of course it wasn't. No, originally I had planned to just kind of have like a conversation style podcast. So it would be kind of one guest, one episode was the idea. So it would be like, this episode is going to be a conversation with this person, this episode's going to be a conversation with this person. But after I'd done maybe 3 or 4, I started to notice these kind of parallels and correspondences between these conversations. And I started thinking, oh, wow, it's really interesting how she said this and she said something really similar, or he said something really different. And those kind of points became points of kind of contact between the people, became really evident to me. So I realized I wanted to make that part of the series, part of what was happening in the podcast. So I made that decision. Even though I knew it would be a lot more work, I decided it would be worth the extra effort. And I think it was for me, and hopefully for listeners as well.
I mean, there's something beautiful about just doing it for yourself too. I mean, I think that's ultimately for me as well. I still get so much joy out of interviewing people and that one-on-one conversation, that everything else about FreshEd, and if people listen to it or not, like I actually, in the end, I don't care. It is so selfish, but I think that's what made it possible for me to keep doing this, because every single week when I do an interview, it's new, it's different, it's exciting, I'm learning, we're creating something. And that alone is enough to sort of keep the momentum going.
And I don't think it is selfish. I think like it's disruptive. It's disrupting the way that we're kind of told we're supposed to do things in academia a little bit. And I mean, having said that, I think it is increasingly being recognised as a legitimate part of academic life. But it's still kind of a little bit seen as something extra you can do if you have time left over at the end of the day. And I know we're recording this literally at the end of your working day and before mine has started, right? So it is like this little kind of sideline thing you can do on the side, but it's increasingly being recognised.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and one of the things I worry about is the way in which podcasting is coming into universities, because sometimes I see it, and I think some of the universities have embraced it as more or less a form of marketing. That, it's like we want to do a podcast, but we only want our professors on it, and we want, the name of the university branded on everything. So it's to get new students in. And that frustrates me a little bit, because it's kind of like branded content rather than exploring what a podcast might mean or do in an academic space, or what some people call scholarly podcasts.
That's really interesting, actually, because I think, as far as I understand it, I don't think UK universities have quite caught on to that idea yet.
UCL has. UCL definitely has, where I used to work.
So maybe just not all of them have yet, but I feel like that's something I hear a lot more from colleagues in Australia and the USA, actually.
Yeah, so I think that's something to sort of watch out for. The other weird thing that probably a lot of people don't know about is podcasting is now such a big sector for people to sort of promote themselves or their books or their companies. And there's all of these like secondary parties that are now kind of consultants, where they're like consulting with people that want to like get their name out and, you know, do some PR. And then they reach out to podcasts and say, like, they pitch them an idea. It's like, would you like to, you know, interview this person or that person? And I get these emails pretty much every day now to get people on FreshEd. Sometimes I look up who these people are, and it's like often, you know, it's like the head of charter schools, or it's like all of these people in education that are doing things that are fundamentally against what I believe in, but they're like pitching me to try and be on FreshEd. It's kind of like, and that's new. That hasn't, you know, I don't know if FreshEd has changed over 10 years to become more prominent in this space, or if the sector itself has sort of grown up and now there's all this like these consultants and all these other sort of companies that are servicing people to try and get onto podcasts as a form of marketing.
Yeah, it feels like so many aspects of life, if you want to make something good, you have to constantly be slightly fighting the forces of like global capitalism.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a funny thing. I get reading the inbox in the morning. It's always exciting to see what new person is trying to, you know, get onto FreshEd that clearly has never heard of FreshEd or listened to an episode of FreshEd. It's just we're like on this list that then we get bombarded with potential clients.
Have you considered getting someone on who you wildly disagree with and just taking them down?
I could.
It would be a different style of podcast.
Exactly. I mean, you know, what we ended up doing was like saying, because we do want people that I disagree with. I don't want to just sort of put the people on the show that I only agree with. But what we've done is we've decided that we would only focus on people that have like new work that is out in the world as like the basis. So we don't want to sort of like talk to someone just because that company is deciding to do a bit of a PR push and they want to sort of come on the show or any show, you know. But if they've written a new book or a new article or something that they want to sort of talk about, then we'd be happy to review it and look at it. I don't know if there's a good way to sort of navigate this space. It seems very fraught with a lot of like landmines that you have to navigate.
I think so. I think you just need to know yourself and know what you're trying to do and not forget that. And that's really the only way to navigate it.
So tell me about this other podcast that you are working on with students called My Voice, My Glasgow. What is this?
Yeah, well, so the kind of wider project is called My Voice, My Glasgow. We actually don't have a name for the podcasts that we're making yet. And I think it is going to be 2 separate podcasts. So basically, I got a grant to do a piece of research on language and identity in schools in Glasgow, like secondary schools. So with kind of teenagers between the ages of like 12-ish and 16-ish. And I wanted to do it as a piece of participatory research. So I thought, you know, what skills could I bring to this? What medium could we use? And obviously I immediately thought of podcasting. So I basically went to 2 secondary schools in Glasgow and spoke to people and asked who would like to make a podcast with me. And I told them, you know, the theme of the project is language and identity. And I had a bunch of young people volunteer. Interestingly, when I talked to them about like, well, what podcast do you listen to? A lot of them were like, oh, well, here are the podcasts that I watch. So for them, like video podcasting is really where it's at. We weren't allowed to do that for our project because of kind of what concerns about, you know, confidentiality and things. So we stuck with audio to their dismay. So there were these 2 schools. So one school, I said to the group, they were quite kind of techie, quite into the sort of technical side of podcasting. And I said to them, I worked with quite small groups, I should say, just because I thought more than 5 would be a big number of 12 to 16-year-olds. So I had kind of 5 at each school. And the first group, I said to them, if you're making a podcast about language and identity, we did a few kind of activities and things about the themes they wanted to explore, the questions they wanted to ask. And they said, we really want to talk to experts about and kind of learn about sociolinguistic theory and stuff. So can you set up some interviews with people at the university? And obviously I could. That was relatively easy. Obviously, some people, when you say to them, do you want to be interviewed by a group of 12 to 16-year-olds about your work, they're like, "Arr." But I found some people who were up for that challenge, and we did some really great interviews. And then the other school, they were up for coming at it from a much more personal angle. So that was a group of girls who were all kind of from forced migration backgrounds. They were from kind of the Middle East and North Africa, so like Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and they were all hijabi Muslim girls, and they really wanted to explore what life is like for young Muslim girls in Glasgow, very specifically, and to kind of explore their own experiences through conversation with other people. So they said, can we go to different schools around Glasgow and speak to Muslim girls about their experiences in their lives? We had a great time. We went around different schools in Glasgow, and they were kind of meeting, really going to communities they wouldn't have gone to before. Like, Glasgow's kind of not very well connected as a city, so people from the different parts don't always go around the whole city. So they were kind of meeting people they wouldn't have met otherwise from different backgrounds from themselves, and they were exchanging Snapchats, they were kind of making friends with each other. And yeah, like the taxi journeys back from each of our trips were just, they were absolutely buzzing with like, and did you see like their school's like this and their school's different from ours, and they kind of dress differently from us, and really kind of, yeah, just like in a small way, but you could see their kind of worlds getting a little bit bigger, and it was great fun. So yeah, the idea was to kind of use podcasting as a method, a kind of method of inquiry for us to explore and research this subject together.
And then what will happen with the podcasts that these students make?
So ultimately they are going to go public. And so we did our interviews, and then we've done some kind of co-editing sessions where we listened back to the recordings and talked about what has to go in, what has to come out, like how they want their episodes to sound. We've got to the point of workshopping kind of logos and titles, although we're not quite set yet. And we're going to have something to go public. I'm not sure kind of how many episodes it's going to be yet. And once all of the group are happy, we're going to do a kind of soft launch for friends and family and the school community, and then eventually they will be public. So there's obviously a lot to kind of navigate about that, and I'm thinking of that as part of the kind of participatory process that we're going to be kind of learning and thinking together about, you know, online safety and privacy and stuff around that as well. That's obviously something that kids that age have to navigate in their lives anyway. So I feel like I'm guiding that, and I'm also learning as I go, partly from them about how the internet works.
And so for you as Sadie, the researcher at the University of Glasgow, what are you trying to learn through this? You know, what's the significance, or, you know, you said podcasting as a method, but like, what is it that you're sort of after here? Yeah,
I mean, we've got research questions, but most of them are to do with, but it's kind of part of a bigger study. So there's kind of elements as well where we're kind of going to do some analysis of, we've kind of recorded the kids in lots of different situations and interviews and speaking with each other. And we're going to be kind of analysing how they're using language with each other as a group. And so we have kind of a range of research questions, but the podcasting part of it is really helping us to answer our question about how young people understand and think about their own language use and their own experiences with language, culture and identity, and how that kind of interacts with their school experience, I suppose. So, for example, if a kid's coming into school and their main language outside of school is Arabic, and they maybe feel like they don't feel super comfortable about their accent in English, they sound a little bit different from a lot of their classmates, but they also sound a little bit different from their teachers. Do they feel like their whole linguistic identity is welcome in school? Or do they feel like they have to kind of leave parts of themselves at the door and kind of change the way that they speak and interact in school and in the classroom? And how is their experience different to someone who maybe feels a little bit more like, you know, they've been in the UK a bit longer and they feel confident about the way they speak, their accent. So we're really interested in, I guess the kind of ultimate application of the research would be to help schools understand how they can support young people from a range of different linguistic backgrounds in school. And once the podcasts have gone live, gone public, we're going to be arranging kind of events and training with teachers and schools and policymakers, kind of engaging with these groups And I'm hoping that the young people will get involved in that as well. So they'll be helping me to develop presentations and things. I don't know if all of them are going to feel super confident about kind of standing up in front of a room of teachers to present their work, but as much as I can kind of support them to do that, to be part of that engagement, I'm going to try and make sure their voices are as much a part of that as possible.
I love it. It's such a nice combination of, real participatory research, but also sort of really bringing in artistic practice in a way to, through that artistic practice, through that collaboration, through that construction of a podcast, so much happens in those moments. And you as a researcher can kind of study that, but also the creation of what you're making is actually so valuable, so interesting, so educational, so potentially entertaining how it's going to be produced in the end. I mean, there's a lot going on there that I think is so valuable to recognize as, high quality academic research and potentially a future direction of where the university is going. I guess to end, Sadie, I would love to just hear, now that you've had years of working in podcasting, you've done your own, you've done it with others, you've mastered in many ways the technical side, you love exploring all of the artistic sides, you struggle with how it fits into university life. What do you see as the future of podcasting, particularly in that sort of academic, scholarly space?
That's a good question, yeah, and a really interesting one. I feel like at the moment it's really hard to predict what the university of the future is going to look like. But I can tell you what I would hope. I would hope that podcasting, but not just podcasting, I would hope that kind of different mediums, media and expression, different ways of creating and communicating knowledge, different modes of both kind of expressing but also making and mobilizing knowledge would become part of what we do in academia as default. I think at the moment there's so much focus on the written word, and for very good reason, because for a long time that was how you had a conversation across any kind of geographical distance, right? Like that was how you recorded your thoughts, and that was how you communicated to people who weren't in your city or in your kind of immediate geographical space. And now we have so much more scope for talking to people in different ways, whether it's like talking to people through audio, through visual art, through craft, through video. I'm sure there's all kinds of ways of sharing and exchanging knowledge that I haven't thought of yet. I hope that the future of academia and the future of the university is us finding these different ways to talk to each other and exploring those and experimenting, and that those will be accepted alongside the written word as being equally important.
Well, Sadie Ryan, thank you so much for joining FreshEd. I'm absolutely 100% behind that direction, and I will be with you on that journey in different countries, but we will absolutely be working towards the same goal.
Thank you.
Sadie Ryan is a lecturer at the University of Glasgow. Her podcast is Accentricity. Please note that opinions expressed on FreshEd are solely those of the host or the guest interviewed, not FreshEd, which takes no institutional position. If you liked what you've heard today, please rate us wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews really do help. FreshEd's team includes Fatih Akhtas, Obafemi Ngunle, Phyllis Che Mensa, and Jose Neto. Original music for FreshEd was created by Digital Primate. FreshEd is an independently run podcast without advertisements and is made possible by the support of the University of Canberra, NORAG, the Shakdev Family Fund, and listeners like you. Please consider donating to FreshEd by visiting freshedpodcast.com/support. Thanks for listening. I'm Will Brem, and I'll be back next week.